when the lane moving fast, let them all cross. If they hate, then let them hate and make a bigger boss,
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak with transportation professionals, because at the end of the day, you guys, I want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve, so you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. Happy Friday, everybody. We got a very special show for you guys here today. Intermodal drayage, all of that stuff. It's a whole other side of the industry, you guys. There's a lot of stuff going on in that side of the industry with, in regards to tariffs and everything else, market shifts. And I figure who better to bring on this show than Mr. Jason Hilsenbeck today to talk about all of this. So Jason, thank you so much for joining me.
A pleasure to be here.
No, man, I think what we've met for the first time, what was it? Was it 2021 at in Austin?
It might be, yeah. TIA, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Huh.
Dude, it has been a long time, and you've been at it now for a while. I mean, before we get into any of that stuff, man, how'd you get your start in freight? Like, what brought you into the transportation industry, Jason?
Well, crazy enough, I got a degree in this from Western Illinois University, so I wanted to be in it.
Oh, that's fun. So you went to college for supply chain?
Yeah, I got a degree in it, and I enjoyed it all the time. I just love it.
So did you start off working at like on the drayage and intermodal side of things, and have you always worked on that?
Yeah, that's been my thing since college. Out of college, I got hired at a company that had an intermodal contract, and it was a company called GenX here in Chicago, and I was hired to do dispatch. So I started out trying to find drayage truckers to move containers, and back then it was rail trailers. It wasn't really even containers at that time.
That's okay, dude. So what's been the biggest evolution that you've seen, do you think, on from your side of the industry there over your career? What's been the biggest change that has happened?
I would say just back then it was 45 and 48 foot rail trailers, and then it went to 48-foot size containers, and that the evolution went to 53-foot size containers for domestic intermodal. And when I started my company, like my job out of college, it was really before the internet. And in 1999, I was like, this internet thing might stick around. And my short story is, I wished there was a website that listed the container truckers, not just any trucker, but the ones that specialized in pulling containers. That's what my job was, and decided to make two websites out of it.
And so with having all of that, so like let's talk about what you're doing now with your company, right? So it's like you have two different does it list off all of the specific carriers, and it's based on what they're actually doing, like what equipment they're pulling, what they run, and all of that?
Yeah, for the drayage side, yeah. Drayage.com is that phone book directory, because the thing with containers is you've got lead time. Like when we did some over the road, dry van flatbed brokerage at this company too, back in the 90s. So, that was more spot market stuff. Hey, can you find a truck? You go on DAT, truck stop, you find a truck. Whereas containers, you've got more lead time, and containers are more specialized. So like, when an international container leaves China, you've got weeks ahead of time to plan the drayage. So you got much more lead time. For domestic intermodal, the 53-foot size, you've got lead time too. Not, you hopefully have some lead time, but traditionally with intermodal, longer transit time, you got longer time to plan the pickup, and you got longer time to plan the delivery of the container. So the load match side's the posting board. For that spot market dray stuff, drayage.com is the directory. So if you got time, you go to the drayage directory, find the trucking companies, which terminals they serve, what size containers they pull. And so that's why there's two different websites.
So on drayage.com, it lists off what ports they're out of, what equipments they'll pull. So if they do refrigerated or not, or bulk or anything like that, it lists all of their services out there.
Yeah, that's the drayage directory side. Because if you're a trucking company, you want to specialize in a
Yeah.
particular container type. Sometimes you're a drayage company and you want to dray only the railroad side, the 53-foot size containers. And then some trucking companies like to do, ocean port stuff, and they want to only do refrigerated or the flat racks or open tops or
Mhm.
ISO tanks.
How important is it, do you think, for, maybe from the brokerage side of it to really kind of I look at it like I'm all about the niche, right? Like we do open deck, heavy haul. That's primarily all I do inside of my brokerage, and and I do that because like there is so much opportunity that's out there. I truly believe in a singular sales focus from a business development perspective, and then once you're in the door with somebody, that's when you can go in and kind of plant your roots in there, and possibly work other modes and everything else that come along with it. But if you're going to go out there, and I look at it like this, the problem I feel like a lot of individuals come up against is they're like, oh, this drayage opportunity is about, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to work it. I'm going to quote all this work out to my customer. And then you start calling these carriers who are, the ones actually doing the work. And they're like, dude, you're full of shit. And then they just hang up on you because you're calling these guys and you're trying to do something that they're like, those guys are the subject matter experts. So it's like, how much do you, like, when you're out there talking to, other people on that side of it, where it's just like they just wish individuals actually understood what they were getting themselves into. If you're going to go out there and bid any type of freight at all, whether it's a standard 53-foot dry van or a refrigerated container, for example, how much is it in the details that a lot of these individuals, they just do not know what they're getting themselves into?
Yeah. Oh, you're spot on, Chris. I mean, that's why as a broker, we're paid to be experts in moving something.
Mhm.
So if you understand, the flatbed, refrigerated, LTL, air cargo, bulk stuff, containers, like if you specialize, that's how you make money. And if you're better aware or knowledgeable on moving containers, you can make some good money being a drayage broker, because shippers don't have time to specialize in all those segments.
Mhm.
They're hiring us or you as a broker because the industry, the specialties of moving something, and you can, help them get it moved at a reasonable price and take
Mhm.
care of problems.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as I think paralysis analysis is a major obstacle for a lot of individuals to kind of get over, right? Because it's like you look at some of the largest providers in the industry on any side of the fence, and people are like, oh, well, if they're doing it, we have to do it as well. And I just couldn't see, to me, that you couldn't be further from the truth out there. If you're going out there to try and develop a book of business to become a subject matter expert, I don't know why you're trying to compete with some of the largest providers in the industry, because you can't. They can beat you on price, they can beat you on tech, they can beat you on a lot of shit. Find out where they can't beat you, though. Because it's like, just because they offer everything doesn't mean they're good at everything. And I feel like that's why it's like, as you're going out there and building a business, sticking inside of that niche. I mean, is that kind of why you stay in the drayage and intermodal side of things, Jason, as opposed to like going out and doing that for literally every single trailer type in the United States?
Yeah, spot on. Like I want our websites, our team's small. There's only 4 of us.
Mhm.
There's 490,000 drivers that do drayage in the United States. There's about 12,900 companies. So it
Mhm.
is a very niche marketplace, but those 13,000 drayage trucking companies move millions of containers a year. So it's really cool to be a subject matter expert in your line of business, whatever
Mhm.
segment of cargo that you're moving. That's how we make money, is because we're specialists, we're experts, and we get it done right. And I like to be that place where people can find those carriers.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm really right there with you, Jason. I look at it as, the more niche down you can get inside of this industry, is the better off that you're going to be. Because I mean, I could, so like you have your is it like your kind of state of the industry uh coming
Yeah.
up next week?
Yeah. Next week here in Chicago on Wednesday,
Mhm.
we're sold out at 300 people so far.
Nice,
So
man.
So yeah, I do an industry update. I go on. There's a lot of stuff going on, like to get in the niche of how specialized drayage is. There's domestic 53-foot drayage.
Mhm.
There's international ocean box drayage. Amongst those two segments, there's contract drayage and spot market drayage.
Mhm.
And I go over like the mergers, acquisitions, who went in and out of business for drayage trucking. And I talk about business opportunities around Chicago. And I talk about the changes in the 53-foot container fleets.
Mhm.
That's what I do. And it's pretty fun because, it's a really neat marketplace,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then so like with Chicago kind of being the hub, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Again, I don't do a lot of intermodal stuff, but isn't Chicago like the main intermodal hub in the United States of America?
Yeah, for domestic and international boxes, for ocean boxes. You've
Okay.
got such a huge segment in LA Long Beach for port drayage. There's a big segment for rail drayage in LA Long Beach, and then New York, New Jersey, same thing. But Chicago's neat because it's all railroad stuff, but it's really segmented into the containers, ocean containers that arrive on the railroad, and the domestic containers, 53-foot containers. So yeah,
Are
Chicago's huge for intermodal.
so are you seeing more, and if any of this is that you're talking, you don't want to, talk about any of this stuff early. Are you seeing more of a trend towards spot freight inside of drayage this year? Are people trying to see, how can we, maybe save on some of that transportation costs, or is the intermodal and drayage side primarily contract, and that's where people kind of like to stay? And then are they, multi-year contracts at that point?
On the domestic 53-foot intermodal, for sure, most of it's contract intermodal. Intermodal is really good. Domestic 53-foot intermodal is really good at high volume lanes, long distance. The JB Hunts, Hub Group, SCG Logistics, Schneider, Swift. Those are all big companies. There's about 380,000 53-foot containers in the marketplace. And so a lot of that 380,000 53-foot containers, it's a contractual high volume lanes that they're moving intermodal. There's spot market 53-foot intermodal, but for the broker, where you make money is brokering that import ocean container drayage.
Mhm.
That's where somebody's importing something from China or Europe. They don't want to mess around with all the complexities of the chassis and notifications and clearance, and they hire a drayage broker to find that drayage trucker to pull the container out of the port, the ocean container. So that's how you make money on the spot market. One or two containers, and you make a couple $100 depending on how far it gets drayed. The
Mhm.
further the dray, it's round trip, so that's round trip money. So every little bit you go further out on an import dray, it's more and more money because of the round trip.
Yeah, we did a pretty sizable amount of drayage work last fall for an existing customers of ours, and I would say that was I think it's the most cut and dry mode that's out there, because they're like, with all the accessorial schedules and everything else, like when it comes down to, pre-pull detention, any of that stuff, drop trailer storage, any of that stuff. I liked it because it was very cut and dry, right? Like there's no variable that comes with it. You literally have 4 days to pull it from the port. You got 4 days to get it back to the port. Otherwise, you're going to get absolutely hit
Yeah.
with fees. And there is unapologetic. Here you go. Here's your bill. And it's kind of wild to me, right? And that's one of those modes that I would highly recommend you do not get into unless you are very well versed in how those things go, because I feel like a lot of people, you're going to get yourself in trouble when you go in cheap no matter what. But I feel like drayage is one of those things, because people are going to look at it as, and I'm just taking this, Jason, from the standpoint of like, you've only moved like local drive-in work, and you're like, oh, it's 100 miles. We normally pay, $300 or something like that, for example. Then you go in there and you think drayage is going to be the exact same thing. And then you go in and you bid this stuff, and sometimes customers are like, oh, that sounds like a really great rate. If you think you can do it, go pick all that stuff up. And then it's like, you might break even on the line haul, for example, but then there's chassis fees, there's storage fees, there's pre-pulls, there's all of that stuff that comes along with it. And then all of a sudden you're looking, you're like, I'm going to lose $700 on this one container because I thought everything was going to be like a dry van load.
Yeah, you're spot on. You know the terms.
Yeah. I'm not just looks here, Jason. I actually work.
That's awesome. You know enough to what you're getting into. But I would say to some, like when I see you at TIA, I tell the traditional dry van brokers out there that, if you have enough time and patience, I mean, you can learn another segment to broker. So I mean, if there's somebody, I always like to tell when I train younger folks getting in the business, it's like you just got to picture yourself like what the truck drivers actually got to do when you're talking on the phone or emailing. When you're talking to a shipper, you got to envision like I had a complaint in Minneapolis. This broker got hired to find drayage trucks to load 40-foot containers export of automobile parts. Turns out, it was a scrap yard in Wisconsin in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
And the driver had to bring containers to get loaded for export. And it was scrap motors going to China for scrap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wintertime and it thawed. Driver got stuck. So it's like, so they quoted this business and all these other things happened. And my word of advice is like, whatever you broker, you got to picture in your head, do the Google Earth search, see what you're actually getting involved with before you get taken to the cleaners on quoting something low. And then you get involved with it. You're like, wait a second, this is what I had not envisioned.
Yeah. I look at it like this too, Jason, like regardless of the mode, and I'm right there with you, right? Like I think I get misinterpreted when I say only sell one thing, like I am more of like when you're out there trying to develop a book of business, it's easier to sell one mode than say you can do everything. I feel like you can have a more in-depth conversation. And then after the fact, after you get comfortable with somebody, if they come to you with additional opportunities, of course, don't turn them away if you know you can do it, right? But here's where, like you brought up there, Jason, where people get themselves in trouble is they say yes way too fast. They do not actually ask questions, like when I'm speaking to a prospect of mine, I want to ask as much as I possibly can with them on the phone while we're talking to get all of this information out because I hate surprises. I don't know about you. Some people enjoy them. I fucking hate surprise parties. I hate all that stuff, man. I like having all the facts in front of me before we go in and do a lot of that. And I think like that's just where people will always find themselves in trouble is like, and I get it, right? I cold call shippers every single day. I've already cold called 35 of them today. I know how lonely it is out there, how much the rejection stings. I get all of that, but I feel like you cannot let desperation creep in when somebody wants to get you over the goal line to you can just throw a rate out there and then you don't ask any qualifying questions about how the operation actually is supposed to look because money and revenue seem great in theory when you don't have any, but then I think after a while you come to realize like not all revenue is good revenue and you need to kind of prepare yourself for the future by just taking a couple of seconds. And it does break down to a couple of seconds to ask some qualifying questions about how the operation actually looks.
Yeah. Well, good advice. That really is.
So obviously, Jason, tariffs are all over the news right now. Are you hearing anything where, people are looking to actively ship? I mean, and I think like there's a lot to kind of come about here, right? Like there's a lot, like I just said this on the show the other day. One of my biggest complaints about the current administration is like, I feel like enough with the flip-flopping already, right? If we're going to do something, commit to it because there's a lot of small businesses that are hanging on the fringe of making a purchasing decision about where they're going to get their raw materials from. And it could potentially be catastrophic for some of these individuals out there, right? I think like it's a very, and if you haven't ever researched, cash flow in small businesses, that's like 90% of the reason why small businesses fail is because of cash flow problems and everything else. And when you're out there manufacturing goods, purchasing inventory is a very big thing out there. So are you seeing, or, in your experience, Jason, how much of the intermodal and drayage market is going to be on the on the cusp of potentially exploding in volume, because I just think, Canada, for example, how many people are now going to be like, no, let's just put that on the rail and rail that material down to the States, as opposed to just sending out multiple 53-foot dry vans, because we got to get more bang for our buck. And if we're going to pay a 50% tariff on something, I'd rather do it and load the rail car as much as we physically possibly can with shit.
It's possible that with domestic intermodal, it's so subjective to the price of over the road.
Mhm.
And this is what drives like our intermodal world crazy, is that dry van rates, if there's less stuff moving, dry van rates come down, and that's approaching the cost of 53-foot intermodal. So if the total volumes decline, then intermodal pricing has to come down too, and it's not as sensitive to shocks in the system. I mean, intermodal pricing is pretty, I would say, for the most part, steady compared to dry van spot market. So if the dry van rates come down, I don't see a lot of shift going back to intermodal. If dry van rates stay up, cross border, intra United States, then intermodal is going to stay about the same. If fuel goes up, that increases dry van more than it does intermodal. So the most sensitive thing for intermodal domestic pricing is the fuel. If the price of fuel goes up, intermodal becomes way more attractive for longer haul.
Well, I think, it is good to note that diesel is at its like 4-year low right now. Out there, 358 a gallon nationwide. If you guys want, I do a weekly fuel report on my newsletter, which drops on every Wednesday, you guys. But you can also just go to the EIA.gov. That's where we pull all the data from. All of that stuff is publicly listed out there. And again, like, these are very good talking points for a lot of your customers and prospects as you're going out there. I mean, Robert Cowton said here, he's just like, do you believe brokers are booking more freight from international load boards and network carriers? Only posting on public load boards last minute if they cannot get the load covered. And then he's saying that this means carriers on spot markets are seeing less freight than is actually available. And then he says, future show, how can spot market carriers find freight on load boards? And what special guests could we bring on? But no, it's a very real thing, right? What is that going to do? Like when you're talking intermodal, it's like, does intermodal really have a spot market at all, or is it more long-term contract where, like you were saying, like, hey, like fuel isn't that obviously a factor in that? So do you see more long-term pricing from the intermodal standpoint than any like real last-minute spot market? Because I've moved intermodal freight before. I don't know if there's ever been a last-minute get me a fucking rail car in the next 30 minutes.
Well, there is definitely spot market 53-foot intermodal stuff. I see it every day on the load match board. They're trying to find the empty containers in some locations. Intermodal gets out of balance. There'll be, peak season, LA, Long Beach, California, you can't find a 53-foot container. It's a premium. And so that's a big spot market surcharge in the peak season, 100, 200, sometimes $300 on top of the contract rate, and then now when things slow down, then you get deficits in, places like Chicago or Dallas, and you can't find 53-foot containers. And you're not willing to pay a premium because the dry van rates, in line with intermodal. So there's the vast majority of 53-foot intermodal does move contract with those big fleet owners. But on the brokerage side, the intermodal marketing company, or IMC is what it's called, there is spot market opportunity for sure. And sometimes you get a killer deal. Like if there's surplus 53-foot containers in a certain area of the country, like the East Coast, I mean, you can get a killer rate going west on a 53-foot intermodal and make several $100s more going that way versus van. So if you're aware of the spot marketplace pricing, and your shipper is open to a few extra days transit to save, $300-400, you can make some good money knowing that pricing in the spot market for intermodal.
And I mean, I think that's key right there, right? And I feel like, if you're looking out, projecting, another mode, I feel like, if you're out there, you're moving dry van, cross country, or, anything over 1,000 miles or something like that, you should be looking into the intermodal side of things as well. Because like, if your customer's fine with it, right? Like if there is a first come, first serve shipper and receiver that's out there, there is no real must arrive by date from it. you will never beat an intermodal rate out there. Like that will always, and for the most part, right? Like I think if we're looking at it from a price per pound or a rate per mile basis that's out there, it's very tough to compete with that. But that's also why, you all, like, I also look at it like some people will load up a 53-foot van and then they'll throw it on a rail car.
Oh yeah. Well, I know. They don't tell a shipper, and then they're like, "Wait, why did it take 7 days to get to cross country? 8 days."
Yeah, it's just one of those things. If you've been brokering long enough, it's only a matter of time, especially if you're in the dry van world.
Yeah.
Jason, so what should people be expecting this year from the market? What are you kind of anticipating on how things are going to progress? And you can either say drayage or intermodal here, or both.
Well, my specialty is the intermodal domestic 53-foot intermodal space is really subjective to the dry van marketplace. So when dry van pricing goes up and there's more demand for dry van loads to be moved, intermodal follows along. So that part, I think, whatever the dry van rate marketplace does, intermodal follows.
Mm-hmm.
But for the drayage trucking, the import-export drayage trucking side off the ports for ocean boxes, man, it's going to be, I've been doing this, since 1995, and it's so unpredictable because, for example, like I've got customers that export, and the logs for going to China have been like stopped. So if you're doing drayage trucking and you're brokering logs going to China, like your business has stopped, you got to reroute to the East Coast or somewhere else, sell them elsewhere. Grain, same thing. Import side, if there's a particular segment, a commodity like the alcohol from Europe, and there's going to be a tariff, they're going to shove as much in here as you can, in the United States to beat a tariff. And so my point is that if you follow what's going to be tariffed, they're going to try to pull in as much ahead of time as possible to avoid extra costs. But if there's a solid tariff that takes effect, then that import segment is going to hold off as long as possible, and the volumes will go down. Because if they think the tariff's going to be lifted, you're not going to ship from overseas. If you can avoid a tariff 6 months from now, you're going to hold off as long as you can. So it's going to be crazy for the drayage truckers, depending on what cargo or customers that they handle.
Yeah. I think there's a lot kind of waiting in the wind this year, Jason, on it.
Yeah.
And, like I was alluding to earlier, and what I was saying on my show earlier this week, like I'm not going to argue who's right and who's wrong with the tariff, thing. But like at the end of the day, I just want that consistent. Like if we're going to do something, like let's commit to it so people can actually start planning out their year. Because you're right. When we're talking a 25% increase, again, I went to public school, so a lot of my math is, it's very subjective on it. But like that's a lot of money we're talking about there, right? Like that's a lot. That's a massive increase if you're going to go out there and if you're sourcing any of those goods that are potentially going to be affected by tariffs. And it could. There's a lot of negative that could come from it. At the end of the day. And for me, it's just like, if we're going to do anything, like, let's just plant our flag, like legitimately, and just stay there for a bit instead of flip-flop. I hate the flip-flop, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I think the flip-flop is very detrimental to the smaller businesses. Yes, some of the larger companies can absorb that. They're not necessarily fretting anything, but if you're looking at the small to the mid-size operations that are out there, which is like 90% of the US economy is small business, it could be detrimental to a lot of them. And that's what I don't want to see happen.
Yeah. We're in a very unique environment right now, aren't we?
Oh, 100%, Jason. But well, hey man, that's gonna be it for the show, dude. It flew by. I appreciate you jumping on. And I know you said you're already sold out for your event, but is there any waiting list that people could possibly sign up for if they want to get into it?
Yeah, we've got people that'll back out Monday, Tuesday next week. So if there's anybody, we'll try to fit in as much as we can. If people want to make the effort to learn about intermodal and drayage trucking, we'll try to fit them in.
Perfect. Jason, thank you so much for jumping on today, man. I really appreciate it. That is going to be it, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys want, hit up Jason on social media. If you guys can't find him for whatever reason, DM me. I will gladly put you guys in contact with Jason. But we're going to have people on next week as well, you guys, as always. But most importantly, if you got value, subscribe to the show, you guys. If you're feeling really ambitious after this one, which you should be, rank the show on iTunes and Spotify, because that's how your network's going to see value. Because if you saw value, chances are your network's going to see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and we'll be talking to you soon. We don't have